Great. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Maya, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Before I talk, I want to make sure I'm talking to more
Yes,
than
I'm
one
here.
person.
I also wanted to say thank you. I did reach out I got an email from Francis Garay for the HCGLI program from
Oh,
List.
yeah.
Yeah. So I did trying to get I did the information sheet, so I'm gonna see if I can go ahead and get part of that 8-week program. So thank you for
Yeah,
that, because I didn't
you're
know
talking
about
about the one that's going to be in live?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a call with them at 1 o'clock today, to go over my role. I'll probably do some of the training live. I might even do this course again. I probably will do grant administration. So the grant administration one is interesting because there's some things that you have to follow, accounting procedures, things like that. But there's also, hi, Yvonne. Yvonne? Oops. Okay.
Yes,
Good
I was
morning.
trying to get on with the old sign on.
I
It
know.
was going to my husband's email and not mine.
You weren't here yesterday, right?
Yeah, I signed on late because I thought it started at 11.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, it's
Yeah.
recorded, so once we get through today, I will take both recordings, probably put them on YouTube, and then we'll email them out to you.
Okay, great. Also, where do I get the book?
You have to get it from the chamber.
From the chamber. Okay, perfect.
And so you'll try, I'm gonna talk through a lot of the things. I see Marie's
Okay.
signed on. All right, let's get
Okay.
started.
Perfect.
So-
Thank you.
So just to sort of summarize yesterday, we talked a lot about preparation. How to reach out, find out where funding is. We're going to talk more about that today. How to contact the people and get training, because for your own information, to get training, to learn best practices, to learn what other programs have been funded in the past. And a lot of that, particularly on state websites, but even on federal ones, they list last year's awardees. It doesn't mean those are the priorities of this year, but it does give you a little bit of a roadmap. We also talked about where to get data, different places to get data, and that list always grows. Data in almost every occupation that I know of is king. You can have too much data, too little data, you can have the wrong data, you can have tedious data, but the most importantly, it has to make the case for your grant. One thing I want to add to my comments yesterday, for those of you with the book, go to page 16. And so on page 16, and one of the sort of last things I mentioned yesterday was the documents you kind of have to need to have in the can ready to go at any time. Don't wait to the last second. Now, letters of intent was one of the things I really focused on yesterday, because again, people are well-meaning. They want to give you letters of support, but they forget, stuff happens. They forget to give it to you. And then all of a sudden it's the day before the grant's due and you don't have it. And I find with funding sources, more and more letters of support are really important. The one thing I forgot to mention yesterday in Exhibit 6 on page 16, if you don't have the workbook, these are things you need to have ready to go, because you're probably, once you start really get into grant writing or grant seeking, you're going to want to look at multiple funding sources at the same time. Sometimes you're applying for grants at the same time. And just as an aside, my 28-year-old daughter watched me her whole life, and now she's the grants coordinator for a nonprofit in New Haven. She has to write and manage somewhere around 30 or 40 grants a year. Some of them are little ones, big ones, so she understands. So having a list of your board of directors, your financial statements, your 501c3 determination letter, letters of support, the history of your organization. These are all things you need to have all the time. The one thing you're going to need to do and have ready is you're going to end up going on grants.gov, the federal grants source. And you can go on, and they only let you go through a couple pages if you don't establish a username and password. But ultimately, you're going to need to establish your identity through they call it the SAM system, SAM, and that stands for the System of Award Management. Almost everything you do with grants.gov goes through this web portal. And what you're going to need to have is your Dun & Bradstreet's ID number. I know this world that we live in, you have to have usernames and passwords to get a cup of coffee practically. I mean, it's crazy. I go to Starbucks and I have to show them my username. It's crazy. But the DUNS number is your Dun & Bradstreet's number. I'm going to guess that almost none of you know what that is. Some of you may know. Now, it's sort of like Dun & Bradstreet is a big marketing. You look them up, Google it. You have a Dun & Bradstreet's number. You just don't know what it is. But one of the things you'll do after today is go on Dun & Bradstreet. If for some reason you can't get it and they don't have it or whatever, almost every organization, like a library, Wanda, would have a Dun & Bradstreet's number. A city, a town, they all have Dun & Bradstreet. But usually only the accounting department of a town, for example, would know what it is. So get that DUNS number, because when you go into the SAM system to register for grant seeking opportunities, you need that DUNS number or else you can't do it. So that's one thing I left off yesterday I meant to mention. So it's all this preparation. And I told you yesterday, 75% of your time on a grant is all in the preparation. And the other big thing from yesterday I'll mention, and then now we'll move on to today's sort of what we're going to cover, is the establishment of relationships with the people that could give you money. And they're listening to your sales pitch every opportunity you can to sell what you're doing. And B, you're going to be working with them if you do get a grant. There's going to be problems in your grant. There's always something. There's all these requirements like purchasing, procurement, like I mentioned yesterday, is you have to procure the items in your grant in a certain way. That's a really important question of those 25 questions. But you don't want to assume that and then you find out. Like a legal notice in a newspaper is, you don't have to procure that because the market is limited to just that newspaper. So these are all the things you're going to run into in grant administration, and I do a 4-hour course on that through LISC, where you're going to be, join that program. That could be anything from procurement, financial requirements, reporting requirements, prevailing wage if you're doing something physical to a building. There's all kinds of things, civil rights, equal opportunity, equity. There's always new things that come up in the federal regulations that get added on. So that's, the relationship building is really important. It's sort of old school. If any of you ever read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, have you ever heard of this book? Right? It was written in 1936 by Dale Carnegie. No relation. And this book is all about relationship building with people you interact with, and that in sales. It's all about talking to people and making it about them. So when you talk to people and you connect on the grant, maybe it's obvious to say this, but not everybody knows this. You always make it about the other person, ask them about them. This is all about relationship building. So I'll leave it at that. Today, we're going to take it from the writing process, talk about editing, and then talk about some resource building. So in the writing process, if you're in this sort of process we started yesterday, where you've gotten your answers to your questions, you've got your data together, you created an outline of everything you need to do. There's always going to be some things you leave for another day or a little later on because you didn't get a little particular piece of information or a budget. Very often with budgets, you don't have every single thing buttoned up. You have to move on in the process, because usually when you get to this point, you're starting to feel the pressure of the calendar pressing upon you that the due date for this grant is coming up. With state grants, and even some federal grants, there are a million different little things that you have to research when you have this outline done. So let's say you have it all together and you have maybe one or two things. Generally, you have a pile at that point. You have a pile of notes, you have an outline with a sticky note on the side saying you need to get this, or you need, I gotta go to Marie and get that, I have to go to Wanda and get that. You take all that stuff and you really just have to write. It sounds so simple. You need to, if you remember nothing else I say today, here's my best advice to you. When you sit down to actually write the narrative, never edit what you're doing while you're writing, ever, because it's a distraction. It basically slows you down because, again, you're feeling a pressure. You might be applying for 2 or 3 grants at the same time. My daughter Colette is very often writing 5 grants at the same time. She's really in that, in that mode. So you never, ever, nothing else today, never edit while you're writing. That's a specific thing that we're going to talk about after this little section. The other thing I told you yesterday to remind you about is if you're working off of a share drive or grants.gov, where you have to actually type into an Adobe format for grants, and with federal grants, it's all on Adobe. Not only have the most recent version of Adobe, make sure you or have one compatible with the website, but I also encourage you to do it in a different word processing format. It's just makes sense because you're going to be limited to what you could put into those little squares on grants.gov. It could be 1,000 characters or 1,000 words, even with state programs. Sometimes state sort of a combination of, sometimes they want hard copy, sometimes they want you to do it online. But with federal, it's almost all online. So I would type it out in Word. So you can play with the number of characters. This way you can plop it right into the little square on grants.gov. Sometimes you have to learn how to scroll down on it. But you also might play with the fonts a little bit. I would always encourage you to do that in case some catastrophe while you're doing it shuts down your computer and you lost all that work. You always have it in Word. So these are just common sense things. When you sit down to write, I want you to look at page 18. So as you look at your outline, you kind of have to go along with the outline. But the biggest thing here is to use simple and direct language. You'll have a chance to upgrade that a little bit later in terms of using more professional sounding language or more appropriate to your vocation. But I want you to look at this page 18. I think you'll get the message very quickly on how I want you to approach your writing in this phase of the grant. All of these, if you usually write, you can simplify. Those examples are to help you fit everything you need to fit into the spaces that you're going to need to on the federal grant side and even on the state, but more importantly, the federal. So you can see what I'm saying. There's much simpler ways of saying things. We tend to want to say things and be really smart and show how great our program is, and that's fine. But when you're at this phase, you want to simplify, simplify, simplify. And the reader, again, is reading. I know I'm emphasizing the same thing over and over from yesterday. The reader is reading 10 or 20 different grants. They don't want it to be, like a word souffle, as some people call it, of words, and words that they read. Sometimes you write, and it's saying something quite simple, and they miss the point. So if you look at page 18, you get the picture of what I'm talking about. If you look at page 19, Exhibit 8, the writing examples, I want you to look at the sequence of writing here. The first paragraph tends to run on and on. It has no data whatsoever in the writing. Just kind of read along while we're talking. The second sample shows they're very different things, topics, but it doesn't matter. The second topic is, it starts to use data. Remember, I was talking about how you use data. There's no table here, but it shows at least some statistical information because you're trying to make a point. What is the existing problem, as we talked about yesterday? And the third one talked about surveys and, again, use data based on a survey. Now, all three of these examples, it shows you a progression basically, are examples of my writing at different stages of my career. So number one was I was an undergraduate social work student in 1970 something, 8, I guess. Yes, 77, 78. The writing there is just running on and on and on. I don't like to put down other people's writing. I'm happy to put down my own. But this was something I wrote when I was about 19 or 20 years old. I could have used data, but I wanted to show them how smart I was. The second sample, when I was in graduate school, I had an internship with the city of New Haven, and I begged them to give me something to do that was professional. I was getting, making copies of things, getting coffee, all that kind of stuff that interns do. But they gave me a little parking study to do a written, like they wanted to see what I can do with data because they were applying for funding for infrastructure improvements, street improvements. And part of that was parking meters. So this is exactly what I wrote. I just, this is verbatim what I wrote for them. And that opened the door for me to do more writing for them and eventually led to some grant writing. And the third was from a grant that I wrote for the town of Hebron in probably 1992, somewhere around there. And that grant got funded. This was to extend the water line for a low-income area so they can turn these two-season little cottages into permanent housing for low-income folks. The last letter, I'm just trying to make a point. Did you read the last number D? Just read it for a second. You're probably thinking, what the heck is this guy talking about? There actually is a point that he's trying to make. I know the man who wrote this letter. This is the actual letter. I took off the dear and the from because I don't, I'm not trying to make fun of them. I'm trying to make a point that you can communicate much more clearly. This gentleman, for some reason, wanted to get in these. It's very obtuse how he's communicating. This man's still with us. He's probably 90 now. Interesting, very interesting guy, but he had a sort of, if you know the word circuitous, sort of a wiggly way to get to his point. And so writing needs to be simple. It needs to be, at least at this stage of the grant writing process, you need to simplify. So with that in mind, let's go to pages 20 and 21. I have a little assignment for you today. So what I'd like to do is take 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most. Wanda and Marie. Now, who doesn't have a book? One of you doesn't have a book. Is that Yvonne? Yvonne? I guess so. Why don't we do this? Wanda, why don't you take the first 3?
Yeah, I don't have a book.
Okay, so you just listen in. I'll read
Okay.
I'll read it when we get done. Wanda, you take the first 3. Marie, you take the second 3. And Maya, you take the third 3. And I'll do number 10. I already, obviously done this a million times. So why don't you take a minute, and I want you, given that page 18, I want you to simplify these sentences, reduce the words. Now, there's no right answer because there's a lot of factors. Who you're talking to, sort of what you're trying to communicate, how polite you want to be. But why don't we start the clock, take about 5 or 6 minutes and do your editing, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes. while you're waiting, Yvonne, who do you work for? Yvonne?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get back to this page. I'm an education consultant.
Education consultant in in any
I work
particular
for a
town?
research firm out of North Carolina.
Okay.
Mhm.
And any experience with grant writing?
Yes, I wrote grants a while ago for my home church. So
Okay,
I got them several grants each year. But I want to do it for my own foundation now. So I also have my own nonprofit organization.
terrific. Okay. Wanda, you look like you're done already. Everybody good? I see Maria's so busy. And then Maya's went dark. No picture. Let's give it 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes. And again, there's no right answers to this. This is it's just trying to make the point about keeping it simple. All right, why don't we get started? I just, just being mindful of the time and everything. It's already 10:34. Wow. Okay, so again, there are no right answers. Yvonne, I'm gonna read the question and then I want to hear what the response is. And if I have any alternate options, again, a lot of this is contextual, I realize. But so what we did, Yvonne, is I had a series of 10 questions. They're ripe for editing, as an exercise to reduce verbiage and simplify and make it more direct. And the first question is, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the School of Social Work. And Wanda, what do you got?
I probably would have just started that out by saying the School of Social Work is, and then I would go on to who we are and what we do. So yeah, that's what I would do.
So you added words, you did not reduce words.
No, I don't, yeah, the whole sentence, I don't think it's needed. I just would go right into who we are.
Okay. Another option, all I say is welcome to the School of Social Work, and then go into whatever you're gonna do. So I went from 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 words basically to 7 words.
Mhm.
Again, this helps you to get things into a tight space on your grant application. Second one says, I will be contacting you in the near future and look forward to being of service to you and your agency. What do you
And
got?
I just said, I look forward to connecting and being of service to you and your agency.
Very good. Now this gets into the active passive sort of concept of writing. What I had in your book was I will be contacting you. Well, that's a passive way of saying I will contact you. So just one word eliminated could give you another word to make your case in a grant application. I will contact you soon and look forward to serving your agency. Being of service is just a extra word you don't need. Again, we reduced it from 20 words to maybe 12 words. All of this will help you. If you think about paragraphs and paragraphs of writing, this exercise helps. Number 3, it says, it is our desire to provide you with our counseling services.
Yeah, I put our goal is to provide counseling services, or you could just do, I guess, like our wish is to provide you.
So
it's got
desires and wishes is very squishy language. You're right. I say, and again, it's all context. We want to provide our, you with our counseling services, or we want to provide our counseling services to you. I mean, there's different ways of saying it.
Yeah.
Words like "it is our desire" sounds like poetry. It doesn't sound like a grant. So again, think about how you write. Again, are you trying to really get to the point? I see Lely joined us. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're on page 20 of your grant book. You have it with you?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
All right. So what we're doing, Lely, is we're going through an exercise to simplify and reduce the words in the way you write as a means of making your grants more compact, efficient, and fit in the space that you're given. And especially on the federal side, you'll be on grants.gov, and you are going to definitely have some space issues because you want to be eloquent, but yet you need to fit it into a certain number of characters in space. And the other thing I told Lely is I reminded everybody that you should do this in Word format on the outside instead of right into before, and then dump the words into the grant application online, because if you have a technology glitch, you could lose all your work. You just have to, sometimes they allow you to save things. All right. Number 4, I think we're going to move over to Marie. What do you
Hello,
got?
good morning.
Oh, wait, before you start, for Yvonne, since you don't have a book, it says, as per your request, we have completed our review of the reports. What do you have, Marie?
Sorry, of course. We've completed our review of the report.
Excellent. So basically, as per your request is completely wasted words. You're not a lawyer. First of all, a lot of lawyers write like that. You're a grant writer. So if you're talking to somebody who made a request, they already know they made a request to you. So as per your request is wasted words, and you said it exactly right. We have completed our review of the reports. I added as follows. I mean, again, you want to communicate with them something. It depends on where you want to go with that statement. So I just added as follows to what you did. Number 5, it says, the purpose of our assessment was to document progress of your client. The following items were noted. Marie.
We've noted the progress of your client.
Excellent. So again, you've reduced it by half the number of words in this sentence, and that's the goal. I have another option. Again, it depends on how you want to communicate. In our assessment, we noted the following. I mean, again, it's more just a communication thing. Number 6, Marie says, one possible course of action taken to correct the problem would be to eliminate the group member herself. What do you got, Marie?
We're in the process of correcting the problem.
Okay. You eliminated roughly half the words. You're telling them a conclusion. Now, if you want to engage them in participating with you, another way to do this is to say, one way to correct the problem is to eliminate the group member herself. My point in my version, again, it's just my version. One possible course of action is replaced by one word, way. Because you want to just reduce the words, but again, it depends on if you want to include them sort of in the solution. Now we're going to move over to Maya. You're up. What's written, Yvonne, says the existing arrangement of the East Wing is poorly arranged for dealing with the public. What do you have, Maya?
So I have the existing East Wing arrangement is not optimized for public use. I know I changed some words. I was struggling to kind of shorten it a little bit.
Good. You got rid of some words. I would say the word existing is useless because it is existing.
I was wondering that too. Gotcha.
It's not hypothetical, it is what it is kind of thing. I have the East Wing is poorly arranged for dealing with the public. Again, no right answers, just different ways of looking at it. Number 8, it says, I would appreciate acknowledgement and concurrence with our clients to date, our efforts to date, excuse me, by signing in the space below. This is an
Um,
interesting one. Maya, what do you got?
I appreciate your acknowledgements of our efforts by signing in the space below. But it still didn't sound like it made sense to me, honestly.
Well, again, it depends how well you know the person you're writing to. You could say, I would appreciate if you don't know them that well. But another way to say it is please acknowledge our efforts to date by signing in the space below. I eliminated, I would appreciate yours. I eliminated in concurrence with. I just said, please acknowledge our efforts to date by signing in the space below. Provided is a wasted word because it's already provided. You can see it. It's useless word. Number 9. Wait, let me just read it for Yvonne, just so she hears it. A question of where the new air conditioning equipment would be placed is still undecided. The exact location of the equipment cannot be decided until, and we don't know the rest of that. What do you got?
There has not been a decision on the placement of new air conditioning equipment. Location cannot be decided until ...
Okay, so the question of, so it's basically what's the focus? What's the focus word is location. You work off the focus word. The question of where, like, do you hear any questions? I'm being a little sarcastic here, but there already is a question because that's what you're engaged in the conversation. Another way to say it is the location of the new air conditioning equipment cannot be decided until the superintendent does blah, blah, blah. I mean, there are many unanswered questions here, but reducing the words in half is the key. The last one I'll do, if I could be of any further assistance to you on this project, please do not hesitate and feel free to contact me at my office. And how many times have you all written something like that? The answer is multiple, if not hundreds of times, when you don't really mean it. You just say, oh, because you don't know how to end the correspondence or the communication. I do the same thing. So I have, if I can help you with this project, please contact me at. I took out all the polite BS that's in that statement. Again, depends if I don't know the person at all, if I know them well, if it's a business relationship, if it's a nonprofit. There's a lot of variables that would dictate how much squishy language you would use in this. So if I can be of further assistance, if I can help, be of further assistance can be replaced by one word, help. So I think you all get the point that you have to simplify your writing in a grant to make it psychologically clear and physically short. Very often, and we're going to talk about euphemisms in a little while in your writing, people tend to use a lot, which sort of distract the reader from the point you're trying to make. So let's go backwards in the book to page 17. I want to pick up a little bit on when you're writing. So remember, what you've done after you finish sort of where we left off yesterday is you have an outline with all kinds of sticky notes, things that are highlighted, things that you wrote notes to yourself or you gave instructions to other people, maybe a notepad with things that still need to be done. What you want to do is make sure you have everything covered and you start to, but you really do need to just sit and write it out. Don't edit. So these are sort of extra hints I always tell people. Use the outline as a guide. Do not edit as you go along. That's the number one thing. How you use statistics at this point we talk theoretically how you do that. And if we do something live at Concorp, which you looked at, Maya, I'll probably have more physical examples to hand out of these things. It's hard to put them all in a workbook, but basically your data are sort of integrated into a paragraph, but also you want to break up the reading, the visual on the reading for the reader, because again, they're looking at dozens of grant applications, all kind of saying the same thing, by the way. So having a table or, using some graphics are really important. Use simple, direct, and clear language. When we get to editing, we'll further on to this. Again, a reminder on the narrative to make sure you're clear, that you have a prior conditions, description of your project, and a project impact. You should also be able to summarize the narrative in like a side page that you have, like a one pager, I call them, the white page, that's not on a letterhead or something like that. Because you're gonna use this sometimes for a letter of intent, the same concept of what you want to do that might be in the grant. My experience with writing, especially now with social media, is that when you write to describe your program, you should write everything in, try to fit everything in one page as a concept, and then use that to expand upon in a grant, because you might be writing 3 or 4 different grants a year using the same information. Don't create extra work for yourself. Have it ready. But having something in a one pager really helps you to synthesize what you want to do. Otherwise, you could have just, you get lost in the verbiage. Okay. So basically, that's the writing process. Remember I said yesterday, all your time is really in the preparation. You go through and you just write it out, and don't worry about editing. We're going to talk about editing now. I'm going to go back to program evaluation for 1 second. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. Page 22. One of the newer things that are plugged into many grants. Again, I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to just mention it again because now we're going to, you're working on it. This involves other people that you're working with, or even other vendors, depending on how you do business. The program evaluation section is a big part of all different kinds of grants. Again, it's usually comprised of these 4 topics: how you collect the results, the compilation, how you're going to manage the data yourself, who's responsible, or this gets to the issue of administrative capacity. I think many state grants ask for you to explain your administrative capacity, because there's a lot of fledgling nonprofits out there, 1-person, 2-person operations, especially during COVID when people either lost their job or didn't continue their job. A lot of small businesses started and a lot of nonprofits started. And how is it reported? This gets to the issue. First of all, they want to know how you're going to do it. And secondly, they're subliminally looking at your capacity to actually get this grant and do it, because they're going to ask you also probably, what other grants are you managing? They want to make sure you can handle theirs. So let's sort of move on to editing your grants. Again, now you've gotten all your data. You have written everything out. You even have the rough numbers ready to go into a budget. We talked about budgets yesterday. Now it's time to take the weekend off. Usually you want to get a little bit of a break before you start editing. You come back from your weekend and you get everything in front of you that you have. Now your written stuff that you have, let's say you follow my advice and you use sort of a Word Excel format to get everything just down before you start plugging it into the grant format itself, or even if you use the format that they give you, is to basically go methodically through your outline, make sure that every little sticky note and every little highlighted part or every little task that you've asked other people to help you to get information or whatever, or the documents you need to get ready to put it in as exhibits, maps, copies of articles, everything that you've decided is important to make your case, is to make sure you go through that outline methodically, page by page, and address every issue. I know from working on many, many, many grants that you get tired. And that highlighted thing that was a good idea on Tuesday, all of a sudden you don't think it's important, but it probably was important on Tuesday. So you really kind of go through everything. And then as you go through everything, you see you've written everything you want to write simply. You just print out the simple version of everything and put everything away, everything else, all the sticky notes, all the little side notes, your notepad, the list of things to do, because you should have gotten them all integrated in. Now you're gonna edit, because you probably create a new list of things to do, or at least a shorter list of things to do, because now you're gonna edit everything you've done. It's all a process. I go back to process all the time. You can take 100 grant courses. They're all gonna give you something of value, but they don't, very few of them actually talk about the experience of doing it. Especially if you have very little experience of doing it. So let's talk about editing. Let's say you've gone through everything that was like side notes, and I usually have a folder on the side with all the attachments and exhibits as one completely separate thing. But all the writing part and budget parts are in front of you now. They're all cleaned up, and now it's time to edit. Now's the time to sort of get into how you edit something. You can edit things many different ways. You can edit things many different times. Personally, I edit things to the last possible second. If I have an hour before the grant's due, as long as I don't have anything personal that's interfering, I keep editing, because it's never perfect in your mind, because you want it to be perfect. So sort of a generic way of looking at editing is on page 24. You can do them in any order you like. But basically I want you to look at your own work. You might have other people look at it, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. And you might look at other people's grants, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But here are sort of 4 different categories to look at your grant application. The organization of it. Again, I'm doing this a little bit, Yvonne, for you, because you don't have it in front of you. But you'll see this when you get the book. You want to, and you have to sort of like check your ego at this point, because you probably you might be stressed out. You might be pushing a deadline. You might have plenty of time. You might have a child that's pulling on your shirt for attention, or whatever the case may be. Life happens when you're busy making other plans, as they say. There's different ways to look at your grant application and how you edit it. So first I have the organization. Does it flow? Does it follow the outline? Did you miss anything? Are there any hard to follow breaks in content or organization? So in a paragraph, for example, each paragraph should have one idea. You shouldn't mesh things together and squeeze them into one really long paragraph. You want to break up, even if you have a lot of paragraphs, it's better to have a lot of paragraphs than like run-on paragraphs with several ideas. You lose the reader. Remember, the reader is number D, the reader orientation. As you really consider that person who you spoke to on the phone, what's their background? Is the impact clear? Remember, the last part of the narrative is how is your product going to solve the problem? Are the statistics presented in a way that makes it interesting to read? I do a lot of work with federal EPA grants, and I've done a ton of work the last 2 years, and the statistics are always a problem in those grants, because you can have data tables after data tables, but the reader is not going to be is going to lose interest if it's all data. Accuracy, obviously you want to make sure your facts are correct. We'll talk about opinions and whatever. All this stuff, your punctuation, spelling, grammar. Sometimes I have other people read my stuff for that, because that's not my strong suit. I sometimes overuse commas, for example, and it chops up the reader's, the feeling about your grant when it's constantly stopping and starting. Again, these are all categories. I won't go through every single one, but basically, don't let your feelings be hurt if you feel like you're weak in an area. I recently worked on a grant for the town of Woodbridge, and I brought in 2 other people to read the grant, and as if they were the funder. I had the point system. Remember yesterday we talked about getting the point system. And I said, you be brutal with this. Tell me where we're weak, where we're strong. And they did a great job. They were not, actually, we did a good job on the grant, me and somebody else. But the outside people looking in took the actual point system and was sort of a peer review. And they did a good job. And some things are weak in a grant application. You can't change facts, for example. Sometimes your grant, you know it's going to be weak in certain areas, but everybody's got the same problem. Don't take it personally. Almost every grant that's submitted to a funding source in a given round has problems and has weaknesses. There's very few perfect grants. I've never written one myself. You know, I always know when there's a problem. So these are the editing stylistic things to look at for your editing process. Sort of the editing tips. I want to go through a little bit here. In the old days, you used to write out grants, right? You used to type them out. None of you are old enough to use typewriters. I know I'm barely old enough. We used typewriters on the first couple grants that I wrote, but most of it was done in word processing. But usually you have it printed out. Some people are very good at doing it on the screen. I think the younger you are, probably the more used to that you are. I am not of that generation, so I like to print things out and hold it in my hand. I use red ink to edit my stuff, or blue ink, or whatever ink you use. But you could also redline. Are you all familiar with the concept of redlining in Word? If you're not, you go to, there's a function in Word where you can redline it. Just look it up. You make the changes on the screen. It crosses out what was wrong, and you make changes, and then you can accept the changes, and then it cleans it up for you right there and then. Okay, so you don't have to retype it. But if you're working in a team format, learn how to redline. It's really important. Go on Word and figure it out, because other people are going to read it. Show them how you might review somebody else's work. And everybody's sensitive about their writing, including me. And if you redline something, you can explain why in the notes, why you changed it. Maybe something didn't sound right, or it just grammatically was wrong. So learn how to redline properly in Word. I think that's helpful, especially in a team. If somebody's doing your typing for you, which is not as often the case these days, most people just type their own stuff. I've used in Word the voice recognition thing, which is really cool. And I just say the words and they appear on the screen. But there tends to be a lot of editing after that, because I go, I pause and it picks up my and then GTP or whatever that's called, I've used that a little bit. Based on your personal style of writing, you might want to set limits on your editing, because you definitely want to use the end time of your grant process for just logistics, getting things ready to upload. Sometimes you should ask a coworker to actually read your draft and give you an honest opinion. I've done that many times, and I am under contract with several towns right now to actually read their grants and give them feedback. When you do that, you have to be very efficient. Never delay. If they're writing a grant and they want you to review it, you have to respond immediately, because they're under a deadline, and you also, don't want to hold them up. So again, when you read somebody else's, be mindful of their requirements. Definitely when you're reading your own stuff, make sure you got all your notes included. If you have other people reading it, make sure they all have a copy, one way or the other. Let me just look at my notes here. Let's move down to number 2, middle of the page, format devices. This is a common problem in grants that I see when I read other people's stuff, and even from the funding sources themselves. You can't find stuff. You see a table of contents, and and there's no page number that corresponds. So if you're reading a PDF, it's kind of hard to do that. But make sure when you submit a grant that the reader, you make it as easy as possible for the reader, that the table of contents is a clear page number that automatically they could find fast. The headings are maybe a slightly different color, or bolded, or maybe enhanced. The font is enhanced by 1, just so they can find what you're trying to tell them. Have it visually appealing. Again, you want to stand out from other grants that are being submitted to them in some way. In terms of jargon and things like that, again, I'm trying to emphasize the point that you want to make your case for your program, not tell them that you're the smartest person in the universe. So be careful of, really technical words or words that are nonsensical. So for example, unique is a word that is annoying to me. When somebody says their program is unique, I don't know that any program is that unique. Or when somebody says it's very unique, well, that is really a bit precious because there's no such thing as very unique. If it's unique, it's one of a kind. That's what it means. So just watch that stuff when you're writing, not to overdo it, trying to impress them. You could see our program is effective because it's the only one that does this, and you explain it. A lot of catchwords. Some of that stuff you might want to do if you're in the sciences of any kind. You might have to use more jargony words because that's the world that you're living in. But just be careful based on what's in this book here of how many words that are too dramatic or have, I always say words that have IZE on the end, that sound like they're really, your program is like nobody else has ever thought of this idea. Almost every idea has been thought of at some point. Avoid negative comments, conjecture, sarcasm, totally inappropriate. I've joked around once when I used to, there's one particular grant I've written 70 times. And about 50 of those times they were read by one person. And I always wondered whether she noticed what I was even writing. I was pretty successful at this program. So one time I made a snide comment in the middle of the paragraph just to see if she would notice. I was trying to be funny boy, and she saw it. She said, I made a joke in the middle of a grant application just to be, don't do stuff like that. I don't know why I did it. I just did it. This is earlier in my career. Euphemisms, one of my favorite topics. If you work in the social services industry, in particular, you have to be careful not to use words that sort of blunt the point that you're trying to make. So if when I was in social work school in the late 70s, we were told not to use the word poor because it's a trigger. Now it would be called a trigger. We would have to come up with euphemistic ways of saying poor. So limited resource family was one we were told we should use. And that's fine. You don't want to offend the funder by using words that are, not appropriate in today's language. And a lot of people are sensitive about language today. But the word limited resource family obscures the fact that families are poor and they don't have food to eat, as one example, or they can't pay their rent, their utilities, and their children are suffering. Food deserts, So be careful of euphemisms. You may have to use them. There's a high level of sensitivity in language today that you have to be aware of, depending on the world that you live in. Homeless. Okay, there's many ways of saying somebody doesn't have a place to live. The old school way was saying homeless. Then it became offensive to say homeless. People that they're people first. So they should be people without homes. Now it's unhoused. Be careful how you use words because where you might be trying not to offend somebody, you obscure the language that you're trying to get across. You understand what I'm saying? You just have to be careful how you use words. I even heard, and I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, but this is a true comment in California, which seems to be the bellwether of new language that moves to the east. They say they are outdoor residents. I'm like, really? If you're trying to help people that don't have a place to live, try to use the language in a way that helps you get a grant to help them. That's my whole point in saying this. So be careful of euphemisms. Let me just check my notes. Excuse me. Page 26. Let's just keep going here on the editing point of view. Again, make sure that person you talk to, if they're the reader, or you find out who the committee of people that are going to read your grant, which is very often the case in state government. They break up your grant. One reads the budget, one reads the narrative, one looks for the exhibits. Make sure that you want to make sure you're giving all the readers what they want. When you look at it, your conclusions, in your heart, when you write a grant, whether you're really gonna solve a problem, or your boss told you to write the grant. I mean, let's be honest, sometimes you get stuck writing a grant that it's not easy or it's not the best option, but you're told to do it. I'm working with one client right now, the poor grant writer, I'm a peer reviewer. The poor grant writer's constantly being beaten over the brain by their boss to keep writing grants, keep writing grants. And if you don't have the right preparation, it's unfortunate for the grant writer. They have to get through that, but only you know whether the conclusions are going to solve the problem and you have the data to back you up. Is there too much data? You want to look at your grant to make sure. I was telling you data is really important, but is there too much data? Are there biased statements? So again, for those of you who don't have the book, these are things that are in the book on page 26. This is recorded, so you're all going to get it. When you're editing other people's work, make sure you know whether it is the rough or final draft, because if they don't tell you, you might want to say, by the way, is this your first cut of this? Because if you might look at it with it differently, if you don't know, if it's supposed to be the final draft, you're going to say, oh my God, look at this, it's terrible. If you're reading somebody else's work, you want to give them feedback that's constructive. But you should understand they may forget to tell you it's a rough draft. Ask them. Use the same editing categories as I gave you before. If you're reading somebody else's stuff, respond quickly. I mentioned that before. Respect the writer because they probably have been working on this. You're only looking at it for the first time. When you give criticism, obviously, you compliment them on things they did well. If you're going to give constructive criticism, you might want to say, well, this is a different way that I might look at it versus like, that sucks. I mean, I've had people say to me that is not good. And that's not the right way to review somebody else's work. It's not good because it doesn't help the situation. Give direction. This is another thing you might want to look at in this grant application. And when you're edited by other people, do your best on your first draft. Even if it is a first draft, tell them this is the first draft. In Meriden, Wanda, I just put together this whole program, 5-part series, and it's not a grant, but it's a pretty detailed program. And every time I sent it out, here's a next draft of the program. I would be very clear. This is a very rough working draft. So they didn't have an expectation that they didn't say, Dale, God, you're doing a terrible job. And then when you're being edited by other people, don't be so sensitive. You got a job to do. Okay, that's the entire process. No, you've done all of the work that you need to do by this point. You've done editing. The end of it is really the logistics part. It's not in your book, but it's something I think about a lot, to leave enough space. So if you have a deadline of 2:00 on, April 25th, you should probably leave 2 or 3 days to get the logistics done. Maybe there's some letters of support that have not been picked up. But that whole editing checklist is critical to making sure you get everything squeezed in. And if you're tired, which very often happens to be the case, the worst time I ever had, I think, was in 1987. I wrote 7 grants at the same time. I thought I was going to die. I was really struggling to edit them, and they had lots of attachments. I hadn't written a lot of grants at that point. I probably written about 5 or 6. And it was very difficult. I had no one to help me. But one thing I did do was rest. I did take days off in between to make sure I covered everything. So, it's easy to say, just take a rest because you have families and you have other things, the rest of your job that you do that you're trying to squeeze in there. So let's just take a minute. Are there any questions or comments before I move into chapter 6, which is on page 27? Wow, everything must be clear, right? No question? No. And by the way, if you have any follow-up questions, just work through the chamber. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you have a question, you can just reach out yourself. And don't be shy. If you have a question.
I do have a quick question. It's not necessarily anything specific that we've gone off yet. I guess it's more so for someone. So, example, I'm in my last I'll be going in my last semester of undergrad come the fall. But I'm currently a digital banking analyst for a US bank. But will be graduating with a degree in sociology. So I've been at the bank for 2 years while I've kind of like been in school. But it will obviously be considered a career change, I guess, because of how long I've been at the bank and what I do. And this is, I kind of want to get again back into the economic development, community youth engagement. I've been applying for jobs for about 6 months now, and I get interviews, but I just get the feedback. I don't have enough experience. Would you recommend just keep attending professional development seminars such as this one and just trying to get into spaces? I don't know.
Yeah, you know, it's a really good question. I will tell you talk a little bit about the marketplace for a second in these spaces that you're talking about. So that's why I created the Housing and Community Development Leadership Institute. That's why exactly I created, because one time in 2019, right before COVID, I was with some peers I've been known for 30, 40 years, some of them, and we were probably saying, who's going to be the next us in the field? And so the long and short of it was we applied for a grant through the State Department of Housing to create that institute. And it is focused on women and people of color, but anybody could really attend it in reality, you know. And it got funded, and now List took it over. And the whole idea was that in the field of community development, economic development, and sometimes they're separate things, sometimes they're, meshed together. There is a terrible need for new people like you, an incredible need, and at all different levels of skill. So it's the program need, it's the accounting need, it's the, all different ways. It's the GIS, if you know, geographic information system mapping, putting things on using graphics. There's the social media aspect of it. There's a terrible need for professionals in that field at all different levels. And whether you're a woman, a person of color, a bald over 60 white guy like me, they'll take any people that have the passion and skills to get into that field. So you going to the workshop that you talked to Lisk about is tremendous for you, number one.
Okay.
So get the training, but the whole idea of internships through them and other people are really important. But if you call any public agency and ask to be an intern, if you have the ability and you have the time to actually do that, I mean, it's not always easy to do that if you have to make a living and pay your bills. But those fields, and it's not just housing development or typical things that you see in organizations, housing authorities. I'm doing a workshop, in the middle of a workshop, Economic Development 101, for people in the field that are interested in the field of community development and nonprofit development. And very few people in that space really know about the ins and outs of economic development. Not just economic development in terms of how to help businesses become successful, but more how to build community wealth. I try to coach this in a way that is more broad community benefit, like more substantial for the community versus the business. And I find using sort of transformational thinking about economic development versus like a transaction, like you give a business a loan or something like that. I'm giving you sort of a long-winded answer, I realize, but it's expanding your thinking, Maya, I think is sort of the goal that I'm trying to get across to you. And what's happened is these people come to the course for economic development and they want to learn about affordable housing. Well, I'm not talking about affordable housing, but that's their mindset. And it's working out great because now they're being exposed to a completely new thing that they didn't even think that they applied to. I did the first session last week. I'm doing the second one next week. The second session related to this is brownfields, which is work in the area of contaminated properties and health issues in the community. And again, this is a topic that very few people really know a lot about. I've been doing a lot of work in brownfields for a better part of 15, 20 years. And I didn't know anything about brownfields, but I realized that it's a part of community health to understand brownfields, because brownfields, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's important, maybe important for everybody to hear. when you think about brownfields, most contaminated properties are located in poor neighborhoods. Hello. You know, it's near the railroad tracks where they were 150 years ago, where they dumped chemicals, and then they built houses for poor people who work for those companies around those railroad tracks. So brownfields are a part of community development. So what's brownfields? So it's all the whole environmental sciences field. It's about private sector. It's about public sector, public health. I have a friend named Jerome who runs a brownfield program in Philadelphia. And I heard him make a speech last summer that was fabulous. He said, "What do you want your community to smell like?" And I was really struck by that, you know, like, so there's a lot of things you can learn in these tangential topical areas that will definitely pique your interest, and not just pique your interest, but give you places to get jobs. Because the whole purpose of that institute is to employ people in jobs. You can make a really good living in any of these fields, any of them. So I would encourage you to use that resource or anything like it. There are other programs. You know,
Can I jump in with one suggestion? I know I'm not, don't have a lot of background on economic development, but in the nonprofit field, something that a lot of folks did after graduating to at least get some, you know, professional experience was AmeriCorps. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's
Mhm.
Yeah,
it's
oh,
very
yeah.
similar.
very
Yes,
good
we
program.
great workers, 10-month stint. You are getting paid. Not great. I'm going to be honest, because the whole point is to learn about poverty in the community that you're serving. But I've definitely seen a lot of you know, great things happen, programs created because of the AmeriCorps members that we had at my agency that I worked at.
Very
So I know
good.
there used to be
Very-
an office in Hartford. I'm not sure if they're still there, but it's just something to think about. You know, it's if you get an internship, I know a lot of nonprofits, even if you intern, they can't pay you. At least with AmeriCorps, you are getting a little bit of a stipend. So
Thank you, both of you. Definitely, I was writing down a whole bunch of information as you're speaking. So
And
thank
feel free to follow up with the email for links. So yeah, so to Wanda's point,
Yeah.
my daughter went through AmeriCorps.
Mhm.
Her program when she first graduated from college was about addiction and the drug problem in
Mhm.
America, and that led to a beginning of a career in community development HUD programs because she was working in an agency that there's a lot of issues related to drug addiction in that community, but then she was exposed to other people. It's you make connections along the way. AmeriCorps, and yeah, you're right. She didn't make much money. She had to get a second job, you know, and all that. But it was a short-term program. Depends what you can afford, you know, in terms of income. But it's another option. And there's a different AmeriCorps programs. Hers was in that. There's other ones for environmental. Depends the region that you live in, you know, the part of the state you live in, and so forth. But yes, that's an excellent one. And then there's Neighborhood New Horizons. There's a million different places to learn. But let me tell you that they're definitely desperate for people in the community development space for those who want to get jobs. And they're even like many other industries, they're training people, paying people, you know, they're not making a lot of money, but like a paid internship is the best way I can put it. So yes, there is definitely getting out of, there's nothing wrong with banks. Just another point to make about this. I remember as a Southern Connecticut alumni, I was invited to like career day and where we talked to the undergraduate students that are leaving soon. And there were a lot of people that were interested in you know, crime and justice and programs like that. And, you know, I would ask them what what they're interested in doing with that degree. And they said they wanted to become parole officers. I said, all right, you want to become a parole officer? That's cool. I mean, there's many state jobs for that sort of thing, but that's a hard job and you don't make a ton of money. I said, but what about if you're interested in ex-offenders? What about housing for ex-offenders? What about services, mental health services for ex-offenders? Lord knows they need help with that. Whatever your interests are, there's always a different way of thinking about a topic. Now I'm at the end of my career. I'm thinking about what am I going to do if I retire? You know, and I'm interested in animals. That's my thing. You know, so I've been thinking and talked to my wife about, you know, maybe I'll do some volunteer work with animals, but maybe there's something I could do with grants with animals. You know, there's always something to do. So, definitely reach out. I just put my email in the chat for any of you, for any thoughts you have. If you email me, Maya, I will send you there's other things I can refer you to. Just drop me an email and I'll respond and send you some other links. But you're in the right place with the Institute. I can tell you that much.
Will do. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, let's talk about chapter 6 in our remaining half hour or so. So let's talk about sources of funding. A lot of people take grant courses because they want to know where I get the money, and that might be their sole reason. But, as you've found out over the last several hours with me, it's not about where to look. That's easy. It's a question of how you make yourself the most fundable application. So there's a lot of lists of things you can do. I mentioned grants.gov. Be mindful of that whole SAM thing I mentioned before and the Duns and Bradstreet. These are the things that are going to hold you up. But let's talk about the types of grants. Most of you think of grants as competitive. And I would say 75% of grants are competitive, where there's a point system and you have to make your case and you have to have good information. You have to have a good program, not just because you want it or you need it. You have to have a good program. But there is something called formula grants, and those are generally through units of government. I'm guessing that libraries kind of fit that a little bit. They're based on per capita information, like the numbers of people that may live or the numbers of people that may use the library, for example. Yes, Lely, everybody's gonna get both recordings. Lely asked if they can get the recording of this. We're gonna send both of them out at the same time. So the formula grants are based on you checking certain boxes, but they're guaranteed if you can do that. So for example, with a city or town, they get lots of road and highway money for fixing sidewalks and, paving roads and putting in utilities and things like that. They still have to fill out certain paperwork. A lot of HUD funds are based on a formula basis. So if you live in a town over 50,000 people, you can get HUD funds. Wanda, it's something to just note on public libraries that the city of Meriden is over 50,000 people, so they automatically get a certain amount of money every year on a formula basis if they meet certain criteria. It's mostly just filling out paperwork. They have to have low mod areas, which you definitely have in Meriden, low to moderate income. And by the way, this concept of low to moderate income that you hear a lot with these, particularly in government grants, a family of 4 in Meriden, I'm just picking on Meriden because I'm looking at you. Family of 4 in Meriden, the median family income is probably like $58,000 to meet any HUD criteria, which is very doable in Meriden. Okay, I'm guessing. And not all of Meriden, but many places in Meriden. So the whole concept of income-based eligibility is, people worry about it too much, but it's pretty flexible when you think about it. It could be even higher than 57. I'm just making up numbers, which just from anecdotally, from what I know. So formula grants through HUD are very available to places like a library. I've used them for example, for ADA improvements, site improvements, better lighting. There's certain things that you're eligible for automatically if you know how to work within the system of whoever runs the program in Meriden, as one example. Formula grants are found in most government sources, particularly on capital improvements, but there's probably other ones that I don't know about. So make sure if you're part of a bigger community, in any community smaller, it's almost all competitive grants. Any kind of smaller community under 50,000 is sort of like the magic number. Sources of funding, as you know, are state and federal. More and more foundations, as I mentioned in the opening comments yesterday, foundations have gotten kind of the trickle down of what government can't afford to do anymore. Although with COVID money, what they call ARPA money, the American Recovery Act, that there's been a ton of dollars available for all nonprofits, for-profit, everything. That's going to expire on December 31st, 2026. Religious philanthropies are there on the list of sources of funding. Again, very often they might be based on their faith. Only Catholic, non-based nonprofits get Catholic money. almost every faith has that sort of restriction. Sometimes religious philanthropies use geographic, it has to be in a certain region of the state or something like that. You'll also find that there are other sources of money that you may not know about. Venture capitalists in the private market also provide funding. I did a presentation for a group in Missouri, Delwood, Missouri, with a partner. He and I did a whole funding strategy, and it was to an urban league in Delwood, and they had like, I don't know, 50 grants that they normally get, and everything they said, we already do that. We already do that. What are you going to tell us that's new? So we started to investigate venture capitalism and corporate giving. And we found that they're starting to get a little bit like foundations, where they started to work on community-based problems. So, work within the corporations. If you live in a particular area that has a large corporation, they may have a giving practice. It's something that's worth checking out. Have any of you used the Neighborhood Assistance Act? Are you familiar with it? Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act? Wanda, you shook your head a little, or no? You're not sure.
I've heard of it, but I can't remember if we got anything.
It's a program that most people don't know about. So if you're a nonprofit in the 501c3, it's really important that you have your 501c3. In Connecticut, through the State Department of Revenue Services, almost every town could offer Neighborhood Assistance Act funding if they choose to do it, or if they have the capacity. I used to, for 20 years, I ran under my department when I worked for the town of Hamden. I had Neighborhood Assistance Act, and I had to go through the process. So every year, the Department of Revenue Services, and there's a cycle that ends on July 1st of every year. Applications are due on July 1st. There's a process that starts probably about this time of year, maybe a little earlier. And Neighborhood Assistance Act works as follows. The Department of Revenue Services, through a town, offers funding through the private sector. This is how it works. So you're a nonprofit. Let's say you're a Boys and Girls Club. Let's say you're, Habitat for Humanity or something that's well known. You come into a city that offers it, and usually if a city offers it, they communicate with all the nonprofits that operate, or sometimes nonprofits that are regional that do some work in a given town. I'm using Hamden because I work there. Habitat works in all different towns, right? So they would come in and say that we want to apply through the Neighborhood Assistance Act for up to 150,000. What happens is the town is a fiduciary for this program. They're responsible to the state, and they process your application. You have to raise the money from the private sector if they approve your application as a tax credit for that corporation in your town. So if you're in any town in Connecticut and you want to look at the Neighborhood Assistance Act, now you're going to want to go look it up online when you get done with me today. You need to know who the C corporations are. There's different levels there's S corporations, there's C corporations under federal tax law. You want to know who your C corporations are, because they're the only ones that can contribute to the Neighborhood Assistance Act. So you apply to the town for $10,000 for your 501c3 for whatever you want. It could be a capital project. It could be a program, to pay a teacher, or some sort of a program, buy playground equipment. It doesn't matter what it is. The town approves you for that 10,000. You go and find your C corporations. They are generally big corporations. Sometimes they're contractors, physical contractors, general contractors or whatever. And they agree to purchase the tax credits. And then you prove that to the town that you've got that commitment, and there's all kinds of paperwork involved in this. And then they process that, the town processes that through the Department of Revenue Services, and then they make the announcement. The process starts about February to March, and all of that has to be done and submitted to the state by July 1, not one day later. And so again, there's a lot more coaching on this I could provide, but I'm just giving you an outline of what this program is. A library. I know it's complicated, but
Very complicated.
it is an option. A library can
Right, yeah.
apply if it's a
Yeah.
C3. You gotta be a C3.
Okay.
And why does a
Mhm.
corporation do that? You say, why would they do that? Because they get a tax break because you're a C3. Remember, a C3 can take tax exempt donations. Complicated, but I'm telling you, it's a source of funding for a group, for folks like you that are looking for trying to turn over every rock to look for funding. Again, maybe what I'll do is I have all your emails because the chamber sent it out. I'm going to do the NAA. I'm going to send you information. So don't worry about trying to digest this. It may not be a fit for you because you may not be a C3. And I don't know if libraries, for example, are C3s or there are other tax exempt, but you might, you have to find that out. So the point is that Neighborhood Assistance Act is private sector based grant, basically. I'm trying to overly simplify. And when I first started to administer this for the town of Hamden, I'm like, well, I don't understand this at all. But then I started to learn about tax credits and the whole world of funding under tax credits. So let's say you are a nonprofit who owns a building that you want to renovate for your services. That opens the door to historic tax credits. And that's a whole other world of funding that you don't know about. And everything I've ever done in the field, and Maya, to the point of LISC in this new program, they start touching on all these topics in their training. It's a whole other, so if you have a good financial mind, you'll understand tax credits. It's a boutique funding way of funding renovations to buildings. There's environmental tax credits, brownfield tax credits, historic tax credits, low-income housing, they call it LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, all kinds of tax credits. And there's probably other ones I don't even know about. There is, there's another one, I can't think of the name of it, too very complicated. I could barely understand it myself. So anyway, tax credits are another thing, but the Neighborhood Assistance Act is another form of thing that you should all look into based on the types of things you've told me in our introductions, That's not in the book. All right, where to look? Of course, the Federal Register I meant yesterday, we talked about. There's lots of nonprofit trade groups that publish newsletters. Grant Watch is not on this list, but it's something I subscribe to. They have a Connecticut Grant Watch, New England Grant Watch, a Maine Grant Watch. I subscribe to a lot of that stuff because I need to be knowledgeable myself. So if you work with senior citizens, for example, there's lots of grants for senior citizens that could be applicable to the library, for example, Wanda, because you get seniors that come into the library, right? So maybe there's a source through Grant Watch that helps you. State and federal websites, town, city websites. This book that you have in your hand, when I first published it in 2006, I was selling them online. If you can imagine that, online in 2006. I sold them in Alaska. The highest level of sales I had was in Alaska. Why? Because they don't have bookstores, it's so remote, many areas. I sold them in pretty remote areas when I would do Google Earth to figure out where is that town in Alaska. Oh my God, I never heard of that. So, people are looking for information. The catalog of domestic assistance is sort of a generic federal catalog that's published annually. A lot of stuff gets outdated in there. These are all places for you to find out where grants are. The Connecticut.
I noticed.
Yep.
So, just a quick question. I noticed that some of these sources of fundings, like I've looked into some of these, and a lot of the bigger ones are like invite only. How do you get on the table? Or even in the door of some of these invite only.
Well, the big ones like, the Gates
Yeah,
Foundation,
wondering.
forget those. You're not going to get in there unless, you're saving a village in Africa.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
it's hard to get into the really big ones, but network. That's all I can tell you. Larger chambers of commerce. I'm in the Hamden Chamber of Commerce right now. That's where my office is. They almost all chambers, for example, have nonprofit divisions because a lot of nonprofits are like businesses. They have employees and so forth. So network. If you look at the big metro chambers, you have the Mid-State Chamber. Mid-State Chamber is a smaller chamber, but it's a good chamber, by the way. So basically what happens is you network, you talk to people, what foundations do they work with? But a metro chamber like a New Haven or Hartford chamber, definitely have events where you could meet foundations at. They have networking opportunities. The Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, the big community foundations, don't forget, they are a foundation unto themselves with hundreds of millions of dollars, but they are also an umbrella for lots of small foundations. So, you just have to network a lot, Wanda. That's the best thing I could tell you. And sometimes volunteer, join a trade group. You have to experiment to see where the best bang for the buck is for your time. So that's sort of actually the very last thing on this page. Write articles, put yourself out there. There's so many ways to get your name out and exposed. I'm always amazed at how many people read stuff online. LinkedIn, why my program is important. Somebody's going to read that. Attract friends on LinkedIn, because people actually use LinkedIn a lot in business and in nonprofit world. So get your name out there and somebody will notice you. Help out with other people's events and fundraising. Make friends. Remember How to Win Friends and Influence People? Well, that book works. It was written in 1936. If you read that book, it's going to sound like old writing. The English is kind of older, but the point is that the concepts have never changed. Help people out, volunteer, listen to them, ask them about them. You'd be surprised how many contacts you make. On page 28 and 29, I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. On page 28 and 29 are a list of many different foundations. You're asking me about foundations, the big ones. But the whole point is about foundations is, again, what I said yesterday. The newer the foundation as it's formed, the more apt you're going to even have a shot. Because all of you are doing are important. But there's so many terrible needs in the world and in the country. You're competing against things that are unbelievable when you see some of the problems in the community environment and poverty and all over the world. So you have to be realistic about what you can really accomplish. But I just provided a bunch of resources for you to look at. These foundations that are listed on page 29 it's kind of older stuff, but they all still exist. You could probably find them. Their websites are always changed, so I don't put the websites in it because it becomes obsolete pretty quickly. Locally, you want to definitely look at these community foundations. In the Hamden, New Haven area, we have the Graustein Foundation. So if you work with children or public health issues, that's an important one. The Carolyn Foundation is another one that's good for the region, for the state of Connecticut. These are the things that you should really spend your time on. With grants, I'd say overall is you just have to use your time well and not chase wild goose chases. You'll know very quickly, with the response that you get. But most foundations are being hammered with people that have community-based problems that government doesn't fund. Anyway, so on page 30, there's a list of all the state agencies in Connecticut. If you go to ct.gov, you'll have access to all of their websites. Almost many of them have grant programs. These are just, and some of these have changed through the years, but things have not changed that much. So the newest things probably you'd never heard of that I talked about today are the Neighborhood Assistance Act. I could tell from your reaction that it's a completely new thing that you've not really learned about. I'm going to send that out. Exhibit 14 on page 31 is a typical thing. If you logged on to one of the state agencies, this is the kind of thing you would see. Request for proposals. It tells you what you're supposed to do. Everything now is online, pretty much. You don't have to submit a hard copy, but this gives you just an idea what it is. They probably at one of these announcements are going to offer a webinar on how to complete the application. Obviously, you should attend all that kind of stuff on a webinar. And just keep yourself out there. Network. I cannot tell you. I'm going to just end with a story about my career. This may or may not be of interest to you, but I like to tell the story. So when I was out of graduate school, I I got a job working for a nonprofit in New Haven, the Dixwell Neighborhood Corporation in New Haven. And they're sort of what a local community development corp, a CDC. They got money every year. And I was the only white person for miles in that neighborhood. And but I went to school at Hill House, and I was definitely a minority at Hill House High School back in the day. Don't forget, I grew up during the race riots in the late 60s. And so anyway, so I was very comfortable in working for Dixwell, no problems. And I had a really good experience to them, but I was working, my position was funded off a grant and the grant was ending. So I had to go out in the job market. I was about 25 years old, maybe. This is 1984. 85, going into 86. So one day I saw an ad in the newspaper, and that ad was for a land surveyor civil engineering company. It was looking for land surveyors in civil engineering. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what a land surveyor was. I didn't know what I've heard of civil engineers. I didn't know what they did. Everything that's designed in the environment is designed by engineers. All I knew is I worked for the Dixwell Neighborhood Corporation. I had written a long-term plan for them, and I wrote parts of grants for them. That was my very first experience participating in grants in 1984 through 86. All I had to my name was my resume, which was pretty thin at the time. I was just out of school. And I had this big, thick report that I wrote with lots of statistics in it, and which Dixwell used to get grants. So I saw this ad for the engineer, and I said, I'm not an engineer or a land surveyor, but I am a neighborhood planner. And here's my plan that I wrote for the Dixwell Neighborhood Corporation. It was a complete blind effort to send it in. I figured, why not send it in? I had like 100 copies of this thing. It was my pride of, and joy of work that I had done, my biggest accomplishment to date. I sent it in, forgot about it. About 3 weeks later, I get a call from the engineering firm. We'd like to interview you. I'm like, okay. I didn't know anything about what they did. There wasn't even like an internet then. Okay. So I couldn't look them up and learn all about them. I did ask around. I go to the office with my only blue suit. All of you are too young to know Anderson Little, which was sort of like, the Kohl's of back in the day. I wore the blue suit. I go to interview with the vice president. I had no idea what I was doing there. I walk in, he's wearing the same exact suit. I'm talking about the same exact suit, but he was 6'3", I'm 5'6". So we joked about that. And I said, honestly, why are you interested in me? And he said, well, I saw that plan that you wrote. Well, it turned out that they did a lot of work with HUD, and they were subcontracting the work to consultants that were costing them, I guess, a lot of money. And what they would do is write grants for communities to access grant funding. So let's say they wrote a grant for a senior center in a town. They were a design firm. So their marketing ploy or marketing effort was to write a grant for, let's say, the town of, I don't know, pick a town, any town under 50,000 people, Orange, Connecticut, or Portland, Connecticut. And if they got the grant, the agreement was they would get the design work, and all that design work would be covered by the grant. So they started becoming successful at that. And this marketing tool was to have grant writing as part of the private sector. And my writing for that nonprofit, for the Dixwell Neighborhood Corp, piqued their interest because they saw I knew how to use data. I did a little bit of grant writing for the nonprofit, not a lot. And they said, well, let's try out this kid. And they gave me a job writing grants for cities and towns all over Connecticut. And that started a 14-year career with them. And I learned how to write all kinds of grants. The library grant that was in the book, for example, came out of that effort. And from 1986 to 2000, I worked for that company, just under 14 years. And I learned how to manage projects. I learned how to develop relationships. I learned how to administer grants. And it was all paid for out of the grants. My point of telling you the story was you never know where you're going to find a job in that world. You never know where you're going to find money. And if I didn't put myself out there, remember networking, my whole point is about network. If I didn't put myself out there and say, I don't know anything about engineering, but I'm going to send my work to them and follow up on it. They followed up with me. It was serendipity at its finest. It was just meant to be. And all of my whole career path completely changed by taking a risk and putting myself out there. And I like to tell that story because if you don't put yourself out there, you're never going to find the money that you need for what you want to do, or the job that you want. So I hope that makes some kind of impression on you. But anyway, I want to thank you for being on this course. And I will send the recordings of this and some notes. I made some notes of things I think might be interesting. And if you want to reach out to me individually, my email's in the chat right now. And do any of you have any questions or parting statements, comments, thoughts, feelings, whatever?
No, but I just want to say thank you so much. I definitely feel a little more comfortable with even playing with the idea of, being a grant writing assistant or coordinator or anything like that, or looking into it. So thank you so much. If you do have any other, I know you said you were doing the Economic Development 101. If you do have any more courses coming up that you're hosting for the Hamden Chain of Commerce, please put those in the email as well.
I will.
Thank-
Happy to. Okay, everybody. Well, you have a great day, and great to meet you all, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
For now. Okay, I think there's like icing pieces all over the